What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is a Hip Hop Now podcast bonus episode brought to you by and for the producers of this podcast over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. And if you're from the future, well, get your ass out of here. But you're probably hearing this so late compared to the rest of the people who support. And it's not no shade towards you. It's just that there are people who support this podcast because they want to see it continue. If you feel that way, if you like the content, it's not a threat. This is just to keep great quality hip hop content going. Patreon.com/hiphopnow to learn all about it. The link is also in the description of this episode. Now, you saw the cover. We're going to talk about it. Rolling Stone, sorry, doing the Ebonics things, but RollingStone.com put out a 200 greatest hip hop albums of all time list. Under that title, they say these are the albums that have defined hip hop history, from Run DMC to Playboi Carti, from G-Funk to drill, from the Bronx to Houston and beyond. Now, that is a very broad title, but let's read the first paragraph. And I'm going to have a link, because I'm not a hater. I'm going to have a link to this article in the description of this episode if you want to go and just see for yourself. But I will say, bring a bag to throw up in if you're a hip hop fan. I'm just keeping a buck. But here's the first paragraph. 200 seems like an almost, look at this, expansive number when you're making an album list. And in any other genre, maybe it would be. But the history of rap LPs is so rich and varied, we were forced to make some painful choices. There are so many iconic artists with deep catalogs, so many constantly evolving sounds and regional scenes. That's one reason we limited our scope to English language hip hop. Well, thank you. I added that. Relatedly, a list of hip-hop adjacent albums from the worlds of dancehall and reggaeton or grime would be fun and fascinating and something for us to revisit down the road. So, again, I'm not going to go in and read everything, but let's just read this. I think it's necessary for this podcast and what I'm going to have to say about it. So we're just going to read this intro, right? It's plenty more to read, but let's just read this, the rest of this. When confronted with a choice between the third or fourth or fifth record by a classic artist, Outkast, for instance, or Tribe Called Quest, and an album from an artist who would make the list more interesting, the Jacka, Saba, or Camp Lo, we tended to go with the latter option. The result was a list that touches on every important moment in the genre's evolution, from compilations that honor the music's paleo old school days to its artistic flourishing in the late 80s and early 90s with Public Enemy, De La Soul, Eric B. and Rakim, and others, through the gangsta era, the rise of the South, the ascendance of larger-than-life arts superstars like Jay-Z and Kanye West and Nicki Minaj, and on into more recent moments like blog rap, emo rap, and drill, from New York to LA to Houston to Chicago and beyond. And this is the last piece. As we dug and listened, we found ourselves a little less swayed by quote-unquote golden age mystique than we might have been had we done the list 10 or 15 years ago. One of the incredible things about hip-hop is that it evolves and expands faster than any other genre in music. To a fan coming up in the era of Cardi or Tyler or Polo G or Playboy Cardi, the golden age is now. Woo-wee! Are you mad yet? Now, the reason why I read that is because I'm recording this podcast after this list has been out for roughly a week. It has been the hot topic. I'm pretty sure almost every podcast, for the most part, is either mentioned it or talked about it in depth, or maybe even came up with their own list or redid this list. Who knows? But it's been a hot topic in hip hop. So thus I felt sure on my podcast, Hip Hop Now podcast, I can report it because it's news, but I'm going to report it on that podcast. But on the bonus episode for you right now, we're going to break it down. And the whole point of me reading that was to get context, right? Not to just go and look to see where albums are placed or where my favorite albums are placed or where hip hop status quo say albums should be, right? That wasn't my goal. That's not how I get down. I'm not here to just talk about them without the context. I wanted to know why they chose what they chose. There are a lot of people on social media, on podcasts, who are not reading the reasons why they made this list and where people fall. So it does give you a sense. It does give you a sense of why certain artists and albums are where they are. It just does. But what we have here is so much more. So much more. So before I tell you why I really think they chose what they chose and who the culprits are, and if you are listening to this podcast, you can just look at the cover. But let's just talk about some of the lists. Now, we're not going to go over the entire 200 records. It's just not going to happen. But we are going to skip around. So let's start with the top 20 through 1, but we're going to start with number 1. Number 1, they have the Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die. At number 2, they have Outkast's Stankonia. At number 3, Jay-Z, The Blueprint. At number 4, Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. At number 5, Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly. At number 6, Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. At number 7, Missy Elliott, Missy So Addictive. At number 8, Wu-Tang Clan, Enter the Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers. At number 9, A Tribe Called Quest, The Low End Theory. At number 10, Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Now we'll get to the other 10. So let's just pretend those are not in order. That's a pretty solid top 10 for the most part. I'm keeping it a buck. When we talking about hip hop from the beginning to now, that's a pretty solid top 10. But there's a few albums there where you're like, wait, out of 200 in hip hop history? I'm going to just tell you what I think doesn't belong in that top 10. Belongs on the 200, but not in the top 10. Jay-Z, The Blueprint, does not belong in the top 10. It just doesn't. Not next to It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. Not before that album. It does not. I'm just keeping a buck. What else doesn't belong here? Missy Elliott, Missy So Addictive. Don't get me wrong. This album was dope. But top 10, all time, greatest out of a 200 list? This does not belong in the top 10. I'm sorry. Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. I will tell you why this does not belong in the top 10 of a hip hop album. I don't care if Drake has kind of changed this narrative a little bit. It's not enough rapping on this album for it to be that high. Now, it being 10, I get it. But this is not a top 10, top 25, top 50, it's 200. So you could have placed Lauryn in there somewhere once you got some of the definitive music out the way. But to them, we're not wearing golden age, meaning 80s and 90s, rose-colored glasses. Let's continue. Number 11. Oh, well, look at that. Drake, Take Care. That's my favorite Drake album, by the way, y'all. Number 12, Clips, Lord Willin'. Number 13, Dr. Dre, 2001. Number 14, Ghostface Killer, Supreme Clientele. Number 15, Eric B. and Rakim, Paid in Full. Number 16, Cardi B, Invasion of Privacy. Number 17, Kanye West, Yeezus. Number 18, Mad Villain, Mad Villainy. Number 19, Lil Kim, Hardcore. And number 20, Future, DS2. Now, this list, 11 to 20, is a mixed bag for a lot of reasons, right? This we have to at least break some of this down. Drake, Take Care being in the top 20, given their criteria, probably shouldn't be in the top 20. Maybe because Lauryn's there. Maybe because they're doing the same thing, right? A lot of singing, a lot of rapping, same thing. But maybe it should be there. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Going by what they set forth, right? Not my criteria, but what they set forth. Clips, Lord willing, on the top 200. I love this album, but hip hop heads lean more towards Got It for Cheap, right? That album, that one particular, the second album. But I'm not mad at it. It was a time. It's whatever. Dr. Dre, 2001. The Chronic, 2001, mind you. You mean to tell me that the first Chronic is not in this top 20? We also didn't mention Doggy Style, mind you. Ghostface Killer, Supreme Clientele. This should be in the top 10. You heard me. Eric B. and Rakim, Paid in Full. This should be in the top 10. You heard me. Cardi B, Invasion of Privacy. This should be in the top 100. I don't know where, but not this high up. It just shouldn't. Kanye West, Yeezus. I didn't like this when it came out. I did a podcast on re-listening to albums. I like it better than I did back then. But this is no way near my dark, twisted, beautiful family. Well, should drop that. Fantasy. But it's not better than Late Registration or Graduation or College Dropout. It's amazing that this is here. Mad Villain, Mad Villainy. I don't think this should be in the top 20 of top 200, but I get it. I've seen who's on the committee. Lil Kim, Hardcore. I was actually surprised by this because I do like the album, but I also think there's some skips on it. And there's certain albums from other female rappers that are not in the top 20. Where's Light as a Rock? And at 20, Future, DS2. I'm sorry. I know y'all like to anoint Future like this. The greatest rapper alive. I don't even understand it. But he shouldn't be in the top 20 of a 200 list. And I like this album. It's probably the only Future album I actually like. Well, actually, I kind of like the new one, but the fans don't like the new one. That's kind of how it works. Whatever. But there's no way you would have to force me to make a 200 list in order to fit Future in it. And he still might be at the late end of that 200. Just out of recognition. Like, oh yeah, Future has some dope stuff, but whatever. So let's revisit why they did this, right? No rose-colored glasses from the 80s and 90s. Like they said, if we would have done this list 10 to 15 years ago, it would be all boom bap, probably mostly New York and West Coast in the top 20. I dig it. I could dig it. But when you have the one Outkast album that most people would not put in their top 10, not because it's bad, but it's not that one, right? It's Elevators or Aquemini. Honestly, those are the two albums that are probably going to make the top 10. It makes you wonder what's missing when you hit his top 20, given that criteria, right? And remember, it's all about what they said, right? Evolution, from everywhere, hip hop history. Now, I think that was the most important part of this list, because they're not just talking about the music. See, when I read off those names of the albums, it sounds like they're really focusing on impact. And for a lot of this music, it is true. Because you can, if you were around, if you was outside, you can make a case for the Blueprint to be in the top 10, because that album was a force. Remember, it was dropped on 9/11. It had a diss towards Nas and Mobb Deep and all of that. It had hits. It had a huge impact. This list from Rolling Stones feels more like it's based off of impact as opposed to the creation, the artistry of the album. It's the impact, because Stankonia for Outkast, what song is on there that white people love? I'm gonna just keep it a buck. You saw the cover. Sorry, Miss Jackson. You would think that's the only record Outkast made, but it's because it's on this album. This album is most popular, and not all white people. I know, I'm not being racist. I'm just saying the hip hop heads who are white, they know who I'm talking about. They know I'm not talking about them, right? Because they are like us. We're all hip hop fans. We're talking about the people who want to feel safe. And Miss Jackson made them feel safe. But Outkast been out. And hip hop heads mess with Southern Playalistic and Elevators. And there's no stank on Stankonia. But the top 10, number 2, that's not it. Ready to Die, number 1. Yeah, this Biggie had an impact. So when you look at Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions, To Pimp Up the Fly, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Missy's album, all of this makes sense. Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory, right? The first time they really mastered that jazz sound. Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. It's about impact. So this list is less about bars and artistry than it's about, when you look at these albums, how big they were. Now, the one thing, because I'm going through, Dr. Dre Chronic 2001 did not have a bigger impact than the first Chronic. But it's predominantly the one you hear Still Dre, but you hear the most records from, right? Like, you'll hear Nothing But a G Thing get played in an old school mix, but you'll hear a couple songs off of 2001, Still Dre, right? You hear a number. Forgot About Dre. Sometimes you might hear that. Who knows? Next Episode, like, you'll hear a couple of joints from here. Ghostface Killer, Bringing Back the Woo. Yeah, there was impact. Eric B. and Rakim, impact also. Cardi B, You Can't Deny It, impact also. Yeezus, I don't know why, but for some reason, that's when they got large. Mad Villainy, same thing. Lil' Kim, nobody was doing what Lil' Kim was doing. None of them female MCs. So I get it. Future, same thing, right? Something was different about it. But there's just some flaws about that. Because I get it. If this is an impact list, a hip hop impact list, then that seems to be true when you look at that top 20. What's also interesting is that number 21 is Lil Wayne's The Drought 3, which is actually a mixtape and not an album. But the definition of mixtape kind of turned into not mixed songs or rappers rapping over other beats, but making original songs. So they're bending the rules, but it did have an impact, right? That's where it checks the box, the impact. It had an impact. But you know what's crazy about going through that list? More than the albums you didn't hear from? Where's NWA? You telling me NWA didn't have an impact? Where is Tupac in the top 20? You telling me that Tupac don't have an impact album to make the top 20 above some of those? And as you go on, I know you say to yourself, you know what else I didn't hear? Where the hell is Illmatic? Well, Illmatic is at number 24. Before Illmatic is UGK's Riding Dirty at 23. DMX's is Dark and Hell is Hot. And like I said before, Lil Wayne, The Drought 3. Illmatic's not even in the top 20 as it relates to impact. Imagine that, right? Let's just take Illmatic and Paid in Full out of it. They did two different things. But Paid in Full with Rakim's style changed the way people rapped. It made them focus more on lyricism in a way hip hop hadn't up until that point. It's amazing to go back and listen to the way he puts words together because you didn't realize that it was that intricate, that technical back then. And it's not even in the top 10. See, that's an impact on hip hop. But whose list is this? Who's this list for? Illmatic, right? You look at that album today. You would if you are on social media, you would swear Illmatic is hands down the greatest hip hop album of all time. It's always debates about it. It's always people talking about it. The people want Nas to perform it more than they want him to perform anything else. Illmatic was huge with hip hop heads. You know what else is not in the top 20? Snoop Doggy Dogg's Doggy Style. You cannot tell me Snoop wasn't crazy large when he dropped. So you see what I'm getting at? We read their description. We read their reasons. And we established that, okay, it's not about bars because the list gets kind of shaky. And it's not necessarily about record sales either, because if it was, that top 10 would be very different. What is clear is that the impact is probably the closest to what this list represents. But as you start to go further and further and further, you start to realize, well, wait a minute. Illmatic's impact wasn't that low. Eric B. and Rakim's impact wasn't that low. And before I go to the end of the list, just to give you an idea of some stuff that's at the very end, guess who wasn't also in the top 25? Not one album from Run DMC. You're telling me that Run DMC didn't have impact? You telling me that they are not a part of hip-hop's evolution as far as the upper echelon of success goes? You telling me you put Missy album before a Run DMC album? Missy wouldn't put a Missy album before a Run DMC album. And this is no disrespect to Missy because she belongs on this list, but not in the top 10. And don't put a woman in it just to say you put a woman in it, because where is Light as a Rock? Let's continue on. So we're going to go to the end of the spectrum, right? Top 200. This is everybody at the back of the list. This should be interesting. And we're going to start at 200. 200, Travis Scott, Astro World. I thought they loved this dude. Juice World, Goodbye and Good Riddance. Okay. KMD, Mr. Hood. I'm even surprised it's on the 200 list, given what's at the front of this list. But let's keep going. 197, Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, Bandana. Okay. 196, The Jacker, Tear Gas. I have no idea who this is, but the Bay Area does. 195, Cupcake, Ephorize, whatever, Chicago. Damn, they say the Chicago sex rap savant rhymes, whatever. 194. Is this K9? I remember this dude. The Dusty Foot Philosopher. Oh, I do remember this. 193, ASAP Rocky. Live, Love, ASAP. I thought this would be higher. 192, Pop Smoke, Meet the Woo. Now, this should be higher if we go on by what they're saying, because drill rap has been around for a minute, but in his blip of time in hip hop before he was unfortunately killed, Pop Smoke made a big impact, even to the point where people from my era, the Generation X people, rocked with him. And this was the first time we really got into drill music. Not everybody. Lyrics born at 191 later that day. He wasn't born that late. Whatever. 190, Draco the Ruler, Cold Devil. 189, Nipsey Hussle, Crenshaw. 188, Wild Style. Now, the movie probably has more impact, so I'm not mad at that. 187, Capone and Noriega, The War Report. 186, Too Short, Life is Too Short. This is disrespectful. He's at 186. 185, MC Light, Light as a Rock. You thought it was in the top 50, maybe even the top 30. MC Light's 1988 album, classic to many hip-hop fans, at least for the most part. Most people like it. The album that features 10% Diss, Light as a Rock, and You Know It, You Love It, Paper Thin, is at 185 on this list. We're going to stop right there. We're going to stop right there. So I think you get it. And again, the link to this entire list is in the description of this episode. But we're not going to spend so much time on going down this entire list because we don't want this episode to be too long. I'm just going to let you know what I feel. Given what they explain, given where some of the positioning of the records are, it is clear to me that this list is about impact and popularity as it relates to a majority white audience who knows hip hop but don't know hip hop. They know it, but they don't know it, right? And this is not coming from someone who feels like my era and my standards should be in the top 10, because I would put some of the newer music in the top 10. But when you're talking about a top 200 list and you're making it seem like impact, even though they didn't really say that was the driving force, we read what they said. But based off of what they said about evolution and impact and where people are from and all these things, it just seems weird to have not only certain people in your top 10 and top 20, certain artists, but also artists, groups who have a discography with multiple classics. You don't even, in most cases, you don't even have the unanimously decided by Hip Hop People's Republic album above everything else. Now, Kanye, to me, that album being there, I do not disagree. I don't even disagree with Blueprint being in front of everything. But there's just something about where hip hop was and what this list means, right? But it's so confusing because It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy is widely recognized as a hip hop classic and one of the greatest hip hop albums of all, one of the greatest albums of all time. But that's universally accepted by hip hop fans from all walks of life. It's just not about race, even though I keep bringing that up. But it is, because it's America, right? That's one of those albums. But NWA had the same impact, but their message was more Malcolm than Martin, right? Public Enemy was a little bit more Martin, maybe a little more aggressive, but it was more about rally and give us our rights and stuff like that. And NWA was a version of PE that was more fed up to the point where they just going to be like the Black Panthers and defend themselves. America doesn't like that as much. So that wouldn't be an impact album for them, because when that came out, which album was more controversial, Public Enemy or NWA? So they're going to look upon Public Enemy more fondly than they would. And I'm talking about a specific generation that raised the generation that voted on this list. But there's a different memory with that album. I could not be in that room and look at this criteria of evolution and not have NWA in there. NWA should be in there, in that top 20, ahead of any gangster rap album, any one. Pick them, from Ice Cube, from doesn't matter, Chronic, all of that. Straight Outta Compton should be there, but it's not. Illmatic should be there. That was a turning point in hip hop, in lyricism, in the same way Eric B. and Rakim's Paid in Full was. That should be in the top 10. And it's not necessarily about it being New York artists and West Coast artists should dominate the top 1 through 20. But let's keep it a buck. Kendrick is doing something special. That's why he's rated so high. And it's the Black Lives Matter movement and that album To Pimp a Butterfly were like paired together with the song All Right. It's like recency bias in a lot of ways. But I'm not mad at it being in the top 10. Now, a lot of what this is also is a combination of things, right? It's just not that black and white, right? It's not about just race, right? White people can be hip hop fans. You don't have to sound and look like hip hop to be a true hip hop fan. We've seen that. So me looking at a bunch of pictures of the Cultural Council, which is predominantly white, and I'm looking for the hip hop in them, and I only see one white boy who look like he get into bars like he know what he talking about. He probably picked a lot of the dope stuff, right? All of it's dope. Let's just keep it real. But nevertheless, I can't judge by their pictures, right? Because I'm not listening to them talk, right? You have to read the article to understand where they're coming from, but we read the article. And it's a popularity contest mixed with impact, mixed with inclusion, right? Can't just be all the old stuff and all the new stuff is at the end, because who's the active viewer or visitor to your website? It's probably not me. It's definitely not me. It's a younger audience. And if a younger audience sees top 200 and you're missing people who are legends to them, right? Or to their point, golden era for them, well, they're not going to pay attention to the list. So you got to have names like Future in there, names they recognize, albums that has been so universally accepted that even if they came out in the 80s, they'll recognize it. They either seen the cover, heard about it, hear people talk about it, whatever the case may be. But no Tupac? The other thing with this list and this choice is it is more than well known that if you create a top 10, 15, 50 list, MCs, 50 albums, whatever the list may be, if your list is close to being on point with most hip hop heads, people will just like it and keep it moving. But if your list is so bonkers that you have some of the greatest albums of all time, out of the top 200, MC Lyte is at 180, whatever it was, they will go crazy and talk about it and share it and do bonus podcasts for Patreon like I'm doing right now. The only way that I could address this was to look at their motivations. Every word they have to say isn't Trump tight about this list. They are not the definitive word on what is hip hop and what isn't, and what album's better or what isn't. This is them trying to cash in on the number one streaming genre in music. And if they can get any of it to trend just because people are upset with whack lists, it's all worth it. Like you could, and I'm not saying they did this, but you can plan to do this. Rolling Stone is a high profile magazine website with a number of followers, and it doesn't mean it's all hip hop fans, because you can find statistics on who likes what. You could do surveys and all kinds of stuff that follows your magazine, and you can say to yourself, we're fading away. We got to find a way to engage on a deeper level with the hip hop crowd. What does well? Well, list does well. Okay. Well, what kind of list? The greatest, best type list, all time. Those kind of words always work. Well, yeah, everybody does that. But what will get people talking? You put Cardi B in front of Tupac, Illmatic, The Chronic, Light as a Rock, anything by Lil Wayne, anything by Drake. Okay, she wasn't in front of Drake, take care, but we know. And it's not even on Cardi B. It's just, really? Really? Where's Queen Latifah on this list? But most importantly, you don't get to Run DMC until the top 30. You don't get to Run DMC until the top 30. Amazing. But it is a formula for engagement for a targeted audience that's doing the thing they intended. So you don't want to make up a fake list. You want to give it some credibility. You want to have some meaning behind it. But you want to get the people talking. And you get them talking by making something so debatable that Vegas will make a bonus episode solely dedicated to how trash this list is. That's going to do it for me. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at VegasWorldINC. Also know, if you're listening to this in the future, go to patreon.com/hiphop now and become a producer of this podcast to hear this podcast when it dropped. Those who are on Patreon already and support this podcast, we thank you. But please definitely share, not the link, but share the fact that you enjoyed, if you did, this episode of Hip Hop Now podcast. I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.